I wasn't supposed to be in that room. That's the first thing I tell people when I think back to that night, like it somehow excuses everything that came after. Like if I repeat it enough, it'll sound less like a turning point and more like a simple mistake. It started with a long flight, a delayed connection, and a hotel receptionist who looked like she'd already dealt with too many problems that day. Room 314, she said, sliding the key card across the counter without meeting my eyes. I nodded, too tired to double-check anything. My brain was fried. My body felt like it had been folded into an airplane seat for years, and all I wanted was a shower and a bed. The hallway on the third floor was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes your footsteps sound louder than they should. 314. I slid the card into the lock. Green light. I didn't think twice. That was mistake number one. The room was dim when I walked in, curtains half drawn, a soft yellow lamp glowing in the corner. A suitcase sat open on the chair. Clothes definitely not mine were draped over the backrest. I froze. For a full 5 seconds, my brain tried to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. Then the bathroom door opened, and everything went from confusing to very, very real. A guy stepped out, towel slung low around his waist, hair damp, clearly mid-shower interruption. He stopped just as abruptly as I had. We stared at each other. I started, because apparently that was the best my brain could do. He blinked once, then twice, like he was deciding whether I was actually standing there or if he'd imagined me. "You're not room service," he said finally. "I know. Definitely not." Silence stretched between us, thick and awkward. Then he ran a hand through his wet hair and let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Okay," he said. "So either I'm losing my mind, or you just walked into my room." "I think it's the second one," I admitted. "Yeah," he nodded slowly. "That makes more sense." I took a step back toward the door. "I'm so sorry. They gave me this room 314, I didn't realize. They double-booked it." He finished, already piecing it together. "Looks like it." Another pause. Less tense this time. More curious. "I'm Ethan," he said. "Owen." We were still standing there like that, him half-dressed, me halfway to the exit when something shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to make the moment feel less like a mistake and more like something we hadn't figured out yet. "Well," Ethan said, glancing at the door behind me, "you can leave. That's the logical option." "Yeah," I said. Neither of us moved. He noticed that. I could tell by the slight tilt of his head, the way his eyes narrowed just a fraction, like he was trying to read something beneath the surface. "You had a long day?" he asked. I huffed a quiet laugh. "You have no idea. Flight. Delayed. Twice." "Yeah," he nodded. "That'll do it." Another beat of silence. Then he stepped back slightly, gesturing vaguely into the room. "You can sit for a minute if you want, before you go argue with the front desk." That wasn't the logical option, but I stepped inside anyway. Mistake number two. I dropped my bag near the door, suddenly aware of everything: how quiet the room was, how close we were standing, how surreal the whole situation felt. Ethan grabbed a t-shirt from the bed and pulled it on, like he was trying to normalize things. It helped. A little. "So," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed, "how does someone just walk into the wrong room like that?" "I told you," I said, leaning against the wall. "Exhaustion. Bad luck. Possibly a conspiracy." He smirked. "Yeah, the hotel industry's really out to get you. Wouldn't be surprised at this point." He laughed, and something about it felt easy, like we'd skipped past the awkward introduction phase and landed somewhere more familiar. "You traveling for work?" he asked. "Kind of. Conference." "You?" "Same. Different one, probably. This place is packed." "That explains the mix-up." "Yeah." The conversation should have ended there. It was the perfect exit point. Logical. Clean. Instead, we kept talking. About the flight. About the city. About how neither of us had actually wanted to come here in the first place. It wasn't deep. Not yet. Just effortless. At some point, I realized I wasn't thinking about the mistake anymore. I wasn't thinking about the front desk, or the correct room, or the fact that I was standing in a stranger's space like I belonged there. I was just there. With him. "You're still here," Ethan said suddenly, glancing at me with a half-smile. I raised an eyebrow. "You invited me." "Yeah," he admitted. "I did." Neither of us said what we were both probably thinking. That I could have left 10 minutes ago. That he could have asked me to. That something about this didn't feel accidental anymore. I pushed off the wall, finally picking up my bag. "I should probably go fix this." "Probably," he agreed. but his tone didn't sound convinced. I walked to the door, hand resting on the handle, then hesitated. I don't know why. Maybe it was the way he was looking at me, calm, steady, like he was already memorizing something he didn't fully understand yet. Hey, he said. I turned back. If they mess it up again, he added, you know where to find me. I smiled. Let's hope they don't. Yeah, he said quietly. Let's hope. I stepped out into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind me. And just like that, it should have been over. Just a mistake. A funny story. Something to forget by morning. But as I stood there, staring at the identical doors stretching down the corridor, one thought kept repeating in my head. It didn't feel like an accident. Not entirely. And I had a strange feeling that it wasn't the last time I'd see Ethan. I found out 10 minutes later that my actual room was 341. Different floor. Different hallway. Same exact layout. The receptionist barely looked up when I came back down. Oh, she said, like this happened all the time. Yes, sorry about that. You gave me someone else's room, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. Yes, we had a system glitch. A system glitch. Right. She handed me a new key card, already moving on mentally to the next problem. You're all set now. I took it, nodded, and walked away. But something felt off. Not because of the mistake. That part was whatever. Annoying, sure, but fixable. It was him. Ethan. The way he hadn't reacted like most people would. No frustration. No awkward rush to get me out. Just curiosity. Calm. Like he didn't mind the interruption as much as he should have. Like he didn't mind me. By the time I got to my actual room, I should have been too tired to think about it anymore. But I wasn't. I dropped my bag, sat on the edge of the bed, and just stared at the wall for a second. Then I laughed quietly to myself. Get a grip, I muttered. It was just a random guy. A random mistake. That's it. I stood up, grabbed a towel, and headed for the shower, forcing myself to reset. But even under the hot water, my mind kept replaying it. The way he'd said my name. The way he'd looked at me when I hesitated at the door. The way neither of us had rushed to end the moment. It didn't make sense. And that's what stuck. I told myself I wouldn't see him again. Different floor. Different schedule. Big hotel. Easy. But the next morning proved me wrong. I was in the lobby, half awake, holding a coffee I didn't really want, scrolling through emails I didn't really care about, when I heard it. Owen. I looked up immediately. He was standing a few steps away, hands in his pockets, like he hadn't been sure if he should call out or not. Ethan. Of course. Hey. I said, trying to sound normal. No more room invasions, I hope. He smirked. Disappointed. Deeply. Yeah, he nodded. Same. There it was again. That easy tone. Like we'd known each other longer than a few minutes in a hotel room we weren't supposed to share. What floor did they put you on, he asked. Third, I said. You? Still there? Guess I got lucky. Lucky. I repeated, raising an eyebrow. He shrugged. Depends how you look at it. I took a sip of my coffee, buying myself a second. This should have been a quick conversation. Polite. Casual. Over. Instead, we just stayed there. So, he said after a moment. Conference? Yeah. Same. Let me guess. I added. You don't want to be here either. Not even a little. I laughed. Good. That makes two of us. He glanced toward the seating area, then back at me. You got time before it starts? I hesitated. Not because I didn't. Because I knew what saying yes meant. Not in a big, life-changing way. Just continuing something that had no real reason to continue. Still, I nodded. Yeah, a bit. Come sit, then. That was it. Simple. But it felt like a choice. We ended up in the corner of the lobby, two chairs angled toward each other like the space had been set up for exactly this kind of conversation. It was quieter there. Less people. Less noise. More focus. So, Ethan said, leaning back slightly, be honest. What were you thinking when you walked into that room? I laughed under my breath. Honestly, I thought I'd completely lost it. Same, he admitted. I was halfway convinced I'd booked the wrong dates or something. And then you just stood there, he said, looking at me. Didn't panic. Didn't bolt. Just stayed. I met his gaze. So did you. Yeah, he said softly. I did. Something shifted again. Not obvious. Not dramatic. Just enough to make the air feel heavier. Most people would have kicked me out immediately, I added. Most people aren't me. That's becoming clear. He smiled at that, but there was something behind it now. Something more aware. You could have left earlier, he said after a second. I know. But you didn't. No. A pause. Why, he asked. The question wasn't casual. I could tell by the way he was watching me now. Not just listening, waiting. I thought about brushing it off, making a joke, changing the subject. Instead, I said, because it didn't feel awkward. His expression shifted slightly. Softer. Yeah, he said. It didn't. We held that moment a second too long. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. That's not normal, right? No, I admitted. It's not. But it didn't feel wrong either. I exhaled slowly. No, it didn't. There it was. Out in the open now. Not fully defined. Not labeled. But real. We ended up walking to the conference together. Not planned. Not discussed. It just happened. At some point, halfway down the street, I realized I wasn't thinking about how strange this was anymore. I was just walking next to him like it made sense. Like it had already been decided somewhere along the way. You staying long? He asked. 3 days, I said. You? Same. Of course you are. He smiled. Guess you're stuck with me. I glanced at him. Is that how this works? I don't know, he admitted. You tell me. I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I didn't want to figure it out too quickly. For once, I was okay not knowing exactly what something was. We reached the entrance, people moving in and out, the noise picking up again. The real world. Schedules. Sessions. Normal life. Ethan stopped just before the doors, turning slightly toward me. This is where we pretend we're here for professional reasons, he said. Right? Of course. But, he added, we're getting coffee later. Not a question. I felt something settle in my chest. Easy. Certain. Yeah, I said. We are. And as we stepped inside, blending into the crowd, I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself yet. Walking into the wrong hotel room might have been a mistake. But staying? That was a choice. And I was already starting to wonder where it would lead. The first day of the conference was a blur. Not because it was busy, but because I wasn't really paying attention. I sat through presentations, nodded at things I didn't care about, even took notes at one point just to look engaged. But my mind kept drifting. Back to the lobby. Back to that moment when he said, we're getting coffee later. It wasn't even a big deal. Except it was. Because it felt certain. Like something had already been decided between us without actually being said out loud. By the time the last session ended, I didn't hesitate. I didn't check my schedule. Didn't pretend I had other plans. I just walked out. And there he was, leaning against the wall near the exit, hands in his pockets, like he'd been waiting, but not in a way that felt impatient. Just sure. You always this eager to leave? He asked as I approached. Only when there's a better option. Good answer. We fell into step beside each other without thinking. Again, like it was already becoming a habit. The cafe across the street was small and quiet, the kind of place that didn't try too hard. Soft music, low lighting, people scattered across tables pretending to work. We found a spot near the window. Okay, Ethan said, setting his cup down. I have a theory. That sounds dangerous. It is, he admitted. But hear me out. I leaned back slightly. Go on. He studied me for a second, not in a weird way, just focused. I think, he said slowly, if that mix-up hadn't happened, we wouldn't have met. Well, yeah, I said. That's kind of how cause and effect works. He shook his head. No, I mean, even if we were in the same place, same hotel, same conference, we wouldn't have noticed each other. I frowned slightly. You're saying I'm not noticeable? I'm saying, he said, smirking a little, you wouldn't have walked up to me randomly in a lobby. Okay, that's fair. And I wouldn't have either, he added. So your theory is, we needed an accident. Exactly. I looked down at my cup, thinking about that. It made sense. Too much sense. And now? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he traced the edge of his cup with his finger, like he was choosing his words more carefully this time. Now I don't think it's an accident anymore. That landed somewhere deeper than I expected. Yeah, I said quietly. Me neither. We stayed there longer than we planned. Or maybe we didn't plan anything at all. Time just stretched. The conversation shifted gradually from light, easy topics to something a little more personal. Not heavy, just real. Where we grew up. Why we chose what we do. The kind of things you don't usually tell someone you just met, except somehow, it didn't feel like that. At one point, Ethan asked, You always this easy to talk to? I raised an eyebrow. You're the one who didn't kick me out of your room. Yeah, he said. Still trying to figure that one out. Maybe you liked the interruption. Maybe I did. We held each other's gaze for a second. Not intense, not overwhelming, just aware. By the time we left the cafe, the sun was already lower in the sky. Dinner? He asked, like it was the most natural next step. I didn't even pretend to think about it. Yeah, we didn't go far. Just somewhere nearby. Nothing fancy. The kind of place where no one pays attention to anyone else. Which was good, because I was starting to notice things I hadn't before. The way he looked at me when I was talking, like he was actually listening, not just waiting for his turn. The way conversations with him didn't feel like effort. The way silence between us didn't feel uncomfortable. At one point, we both stopped talking at the same time. No reason. No interruption. Just quiet. And instead of filling it, we let it sit. Ethan leaned back slightly, studying me again. "You're thinking something," he said. I shook my head. "Just, this is weird." "Bad weird." "No," I said. "The opposite." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get that." Another pause. Then, more quietly, "It feels like we skipped a few steps." I looked at him. "What steps?" "The awkward ones," he said. "The getting to know you, figuring each other out part." I exhaled softly. "Yeah. Does that bother you?" I thought about it. About how fast this felt. About how easy it was. About how, logically, I should probably slow it down. Then I said, "No." He smiled slightly at that. "Not big. Just enough." "Good," he said. We walked back toward the hotel together. Again, at this point, it felt less like coincidence and more like routine. When we reached the elevators, there was that moment. The one where you decide what happens next. Different floors. Different rooms. The obvious choice was to split off there. Ethan pressed the button, then glanced at me. "What floor again?" "Third," I said. He nodded. "Right." The doors opened. We stepped inside. Silence. Not awkward. Just full. The elevator started moving. "Funny," he said after a second. "What? If they hadn't messed up your room, this would just be the part where we say goodnight." I leaned back against the wall slightly. "Yeah. And now?" I looked at him. Really looked this time. At the way he was watching me, not uncertain, not rushed. Just waiting. I felt it again. That same pull from earlier. The same feeling that this wasn't just random anymore. "That depends," I said. "On what?" "On whether this still feels like an accident to you." He didn't hesitate. "It doesn't." The elevator slowed. Third floor. The doors opened. I didn't move right away. Neither did he. For a second, it felt like time paused. Like the moment stretched just enough for a choice to form. I stepped out. He followed. Neither of us said anything. We just walked down the hallway together. Same one as before. Same quiet. Same doors. But this time, it didn't feel like a mistake. We stopped in front of my room. 341. I turned to him, hand resting lightly against the door. "This is me," I said, even though it was obvious. "Yeah," he said. Neither of us moved. Then, after a second, he said quietly, "This is usually where I'd leave." "Usually?" He exhaled softly. "Yeah." I held his gaze. "Do you want to?" I asked. That was it. Simple question. But it changed everything. He shook his head, just slightly. "No." And for the first time since this started, neither of us pretended this was just about a wrong hotel room anymore. For a second, neither of us moved. It wasn't hesitation. It was awareness. The kind that settles in right before something shifts from "this is happening" to "this is real." Ethan glanced at the door behind me, then back at my face, like he was giving me one last chance to change my mind. I didn't. "Okay," he said quietly. I opened the door. The room looked exactly like it had when I left it that morning. Neutral. Impersonal. Temporary. Except now it didn't feel like that anymore. Not with him standing inside it. I set my key on the table, suddenly aware of everything again: the space, the silence, the fact that this was no longer accidental in any way. Ethan stayed near the door at first, like he wasn't sure how far to step in. "You sure?" he asked. Not uncertain. Just respectful. "Yeah," I said. That was all it took. He nodded once and walked further into the room, glancing around like he was taking it in. "Looks exactly like mine," he said. "Yeah," I replied. Just without the unexpected guests. He huffed a quiet laugh. "Shame." Something in the air loosened after that. Just enough. We didn't rush into anything. That was the surprising part. If anything, we slowed down. I sat on the edge of the bed, and he leaned against the desk across from me. Same positions as before, just reversed. "So," he said, arms loosely crossed. "This is where it gets complicated, right?" "Probably," I admitted. "But it doesn't feel complicated." "No," I said. It doesn't. He looked at me for a second, like he was trying to understand that. Usually there's more resistance, he added. Yeah, I said. There is. Like your brain trying to catch up. I nodded. Exactly. And yours isn't. I exhaled slowly. It is. I'm just ignoring it. That made him smile. Good, he said. Because mine is too. Silence settled between us again. But this time, it felt different. Closer. Ethan pushed off the desk and took a few steps toward me, stopping just in front of where I was sitting. Not too close. Just enough. This is the part, he said quietly, where we decide if we're overthinking it or not thinking enough. I looked up at him. You always analyze things this much. Only when they matter. That landed. I felt it in my chest, subtle, but real. This matters. I asked. He didn't hesitate. Yeah. Simple. Clear. No hesitation. I stood up. Now we were at the same level. Close enough that I could see the slight tension in his jaw, the way his eyes flicked between mine like he was still giving me space to pull back if I wanted to. I didn't. Then stop overthinking it, I said. That was it. That was the moment everything tipped. He let out a quiet breath, like something inside him finally settled. Yeah, he murmured. Okay. For a second, neither of us moved. And then, he reached for my hand. Slow. Intentional. No rush. Just his fingers brushing mine, then holding. I felt it immediately. Not just the contact, but what it meant. This wasn't accidental. Not anymore. Still okay, he asked. Yeah, I said. More than okay. We stood like that for a moment, neither of us speaking. Just there. Present. It was strange how something so simple could feel like such a shift. Like everything up to this point had been leading here. Not the hotel mistake. Not the conversation. This. The choice. Ethan stepped a little closer. Not enough to overwhelm the space. Just enough to close it. I keep thinking about that first moment, he said quietly. In your room. Yeah. What about it? He smiled slightly. How easy it was. I nodded. I know. And this feels the same. It does. Another pause. Then, softer. That's what's messing with me. I tilted my head slightly. Why? Because things that matter aren't usually this easy. I thought about that. About how most things weren't. How usually there was doubt, confusion, mixed signals. This didn't have any of that. Maybe we're just not making it harder than it needs to be, I said. He held my gaze for a second longer, then nodded. Yeah, he said. Maybe. At some point, we sat down again. Closer this time. Not touching constantly. Not rushing. Just existing in the same space without that invisible distance from before. We talked more. About things that didn't matter. And things that did. At one point, Ethan leaned back slightly, looking at me like he was trying to memorize something. You're different than I expected, he said. From a guy who walks into random hotel rooms. He smirked. Yeah, from that guy. How so? He shrugged lightly. I don't know. I thought this would feel like a story I'd laugh about later. And now it doesn't feel like something I'll forget. That stayed with me. Time blurred again. At some point, the city outside got quieter. The room dimmer. The conversation slower. Not because we ran out of things to say, because we didn't need to fill every second anymore. And that's when I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't thinking about leaving. Not even a little. Ethan shifted slightly beside me, glancing toward the door, then back at me. You ever think about how weird this is? He asked. Yeah, I said. All the time. And you're still here. So are you. He smiled at that. Then, after a pause, he said quietly, I'm glad you walked into the wrong room. I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time since all of this started, I didn't see it as a mistake at all. Yeah, I said. Me too. I didn't expect the next morning to feel different. But it did. Not in a dramatic way. Nothing had suddenly changed overnight. The room was the same. The city outside sounded the same. Even the light filtering through the curtains felt identical to the day before. But something inside me had shifted. I woke up slowly, aware of it before I even opened my eyes. That quiet sense that I wasn't alone. For a second, I just stayed still, letting the moment settle instead of rushing past it. Then I turned my head slightly. Ethan was already awake. Not moving. Not on his phone. Just lying there, looking at the ceiling like he'd been thinking about something for a while. You always wake up this early? I asked, my voice still rough with sleep. He turned his head toward me, a small smile forming. Not usually. Something on your mind? Yeah. I waited. He studied my face for a second, like he was deciding how honest to be. This doesn't feel like something that just happened once, he said. There it was. Not a question, a realization. I exhaled slowly, pushing myself up slightly against the headboard. Yeah, I said. I was thinking the same thing. He nodded, like that confirmed something for him. Good, he murmured. We didn't rush to define anything. That was probably the only reason it didn't immediately fall apart. No labels. No, what is this? No trying to force it into something neat and understandable. We just let it exist. We got coffee again. Sat in the same cafe. Talked like we had the day before, but now there was something underneath it. Not heavier, just deeper, more aware. At one point, Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching me with that same focused look. You know what's weird? He said. What? I don't feel like I just met you. Yeah, I said. Same. It feels like we skipped the beginning. I smiled slightly. You said that yesterday. Yeah, he said. But now it feels even more true. I didn't argue with that. Because it did. The second day blurred even more than the first. We still went to the conference. Still sat through sessions. Still pretended to care. But now, everything felt like a break between moments that actually mattered. We met in the lobby without texting. Walked together without planning it. Left early without saying it out loud. It just happened. Like we were already in sync. At one point, halfway through the afternoon, I caught myself watching him while he was talking about something work, I think. I wasn't even listening anymore. I was just noticing. The way he spoke when he was relaxed. The way he paused mid-sentence sometimes, like he was choosing his words carefully even when he didn't need to. The way being around him felt steady. Not intense. Not overwhelming. Just right. You're doing it again, he said suddenly. I blinked. Doing what? Zoning out while looking at me. I smirked. Maybe you're just distracting. Or maybe you're not as subtle as you think. Yeah, I admitted. That's probably it. He smiled, but there was something softer in it now. Like he didn't mind being seen like that. That evening, we didn't go out. Didn't explore the city. Didn't do anything interesting. We just stayed in. My room again. Same space. Different feeling. It wasn't new anymore. It was familiar. We talked about stupid things. Watched something neither of us paid attention to. At one point, I realized how quiet it had gotten again, not in the room, but in my head. No overthinking. No second guessing. Just calm. Ethan shifted slightly beside me. You ever notice, he said, how rare this is? What? This, he repeated. Not trying. Not forcing anything. Just being here. I nodded slowly. Yeah. I don't think I've had this before. That caught my attention. Not even close? I asked. He shook his head. No. I didn't respond right away. Because I understood exactly what he meant. And that part was a little dangerous. Later that night, when things got quieter, he looked at me again, more serious this time. There's something I need to say, he said. I felt my chest tighten slightly. Okay. He hesitated. Not unsure. Just careful. I don't want this to turn into something we pretend didn't happen after we leave, he said. That hit. Because I'd thought about that too. The end of the conference. Different cities. Different lives. The easy way out. I don't want that either, I said. He nodded, relief flickering across his face. Good. Another pause. Then, quieter. Because I think I'd actually miss you. That landed deeper than anything else he'd said so far. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was simple. Honest. Real. I looked at him for a second, then said, Yeah. I would too. We didn't say anything after that for a while. We didn't need to. The room felt different again. Not uncertain. Not fragile. Just settled. Like something had quietly shifted into place. And for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't thinking about how it began, or whether it made sense, or how long it would last. I was just thinking one thing. I didn't want it to end. The third day came faster than I wanted it to. It wasn't sudden. There was no dramatic moment where everything changed. It just crept in, quietly, inevitably. The last day of the conference. The last day of this strange, unexpected rhythm we'd fallen into. I noticed it the second I woke up. That same awareness as the morning before, but this time, it came with something else. A weight. Ethan was still there, lying on his back, one arm resting behind his head, staring at the ceiling again like he had been the day before. You're doing it again, I said. He didn't look at me right away. Yeah. Thinking too much. Yeah. I shifted slightly, propping myself up. About what? He finally turned his head toward me. About how this ends. There it was. No avoiding it anymore. We didn't talk about it right away. We got coffee. Sat in the same place. Went through the same motions. But everything felt slightly off. Not bad. Just aware. Like we were both noticing the clock without wanting to acknowledge it. At one point, Ethan tapped his fingers lightly against his cup, staring down at it. I hate that it's tied to this, he said. To what? The conference, he replied. The timing. The fact that there's an automatic ending built into it. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said. I've been thinking about that too. It makes it feel temporary, he added. Is it? I asked. He looked up at me. That same look again. Focused. Searching. I don't want it to be, he said. We skipped the afternoon sessions completely. Didn't even pretend this time. Instead, we walked. No destination. Just moving through the city like we had nowhere else to be. Which, in that moment, felt true. So what happens tomorrow? He asked at one point. I shoved my hands into my pockets, glancing ahead. I get on a flight. Same. Different directions, I'm guessing. Yeah. Silence. Then, that's inconvenient. I huffed a quiet laugh. Yeah, it is. We ended up back at the hotel earlier than usual. Not because we wanted to. Because we didn't know what else to do. The room felt different again. Not unfamiliar. Just temporary. Like it was finally reminding us what it was. Ethan stood near the window for a while, looking out at the city. I don't like this part, he said. Me neither. He turned toward me. I keep trying to figure out if this is something that only works because we're here. I felt that. Because I'd been thinking the same thing. And I asked. He shook his head. I don't think it is. No. No, he said. I think this would have happened anyway. Just slower. I smiled slightly. Yeah, probably. We sat down after that. Closer than before. Not because we were trying to hold on to something. Because it felt natural. I don't want to go back to not knowing you, he said quietly. That one hit harder than the rest. Then don't, I replied. He frowned slightly. It's not that simple. Why not? Because real life isn't this, he said, gesturing vaguely around the room. And what is this? A bubble, he answered. No responsibilities. No distractions. Just us. I thought about that. About how easy everything had been here. How uninterrupted. Then I said, that doesn't mean it's not real. He looked at me for a long moment. Then nodded. Yeah, he said softly. I know. Evening came too fast. Everything did. We didn't go out. Didn't try to make the last night special. We just stayed. Talked. Sat in silence. At some point, Ethan leaned his head lightly against mine, exhaling slowly. I hate that I'm already missing this, he said. You're not the only one. Another pause. Then, quieter. I don't want this to turn into something we almost had. That word again. Almost. I turned slightly toward him. Then don't let it. I said. He let out a small breath. You're making it sound easy. I'm not saying it is, I replied. I'm saying it's a choice. He was quiet for a second. Then he nodded. Okay. Later that night, when everything had gone still, I realized something. The fear wasn't about distance, or timing, or even uncertainty. It was about losing something that felt right before we even gave it a real chance. And that was worse. Ethan, I said quietly. Yeah. We're not ending this tomorrow. He turned his head toward me. Yeah, he said. Not questioning. Not hesitant. Just certain. Yeah, he repeated. That night didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a pause. And for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't thinking about how it began, or even how it would continue. I was just sure of one thing. This wasn't something I was willing to let go of. Not without trying. Morning felt different. Not quiet. Not heavy. Just real. For the first time since this started, there was no illusion left. No pretending this was just a moment, or something contained inside a hotel room, and a few days that didn't count. This counted, and that made everything sharper. I was already awake when Ethan moved beside me, shifting slightly before opening his eyes. For a second, he just looked at me. No words. Just that same steady look I'd gotten used to over the past few days. Hey, he said quietly. Hey. Neither of us rushed to get up. Neither of us pretended we had somewhere else to be. Because we both knew what today was. Packing felt wrong. That was the simplest way to put it. Too normal for something that didn't feel normal at all. I zipped my bag halfway, then stopped, staring down at it like I'd forgotten what I was doing. Ethan was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching me. I hate this part, he said. Yeah, I replied. Me too. You don't look convinced you're leaving. I'm not convinced I should be. That made him smile slightly. Dangerous thought. Probably. We checked out separately. Not because we wanted to. because it felt easier than turning it into something heavier than it already was. But we met outside. Of course we did. Same spot. Same feeling. Different weight. So, Ethan said, shifting his bag slightly on his shoulder, this is where it either gets complicated or it doesn't. I looked at him. Or we decide it doesn't have to be. He held my gaze for a second, then nodded. Okay, he said. Then let's not make it complicated. We walked to the same cafe one last time. Not because we needed coffee, because it felt like the place where this had become real. We sat at the same table, same seats, but now everything felt more grounded, less like something temporary. So, he said after a moment, we're doing this. Yeah, I said. We are. No overthinking. Minimal, I corrected. He laughed softly. I'll take it. The conversation this time wasn't about what this is. It was about what happens next, where we live, how far it is, what it actually looks like outside of this bubble. It wasn't perfect. There were pauses, real ones, moments where neither of us had a clean answer. But that didn't scare me the way I thought it would, because for the first time, it felt like we were building something instead of trying to define it. At the airport, everything sped up again. Announcements, lines, people moving in every direction. Real life. We stood near security, that invisible line between together and separate, just a few steps away. This is the part one usually hate, Ethan said. Yeah. Where things just end. I shook my head slightly. Not this time. He looked at me. And for a second, I saw it that shift. The moment it clicked fully. Not this time, he repeated. We didn't make it dramatic. Didn't turn it into something overwhelming. He stepped closer, and for a brief moment, we hugged. Simple. Real. Enough to say everything without overcomplicating it. I'll text you when I land, he said. Yeah, I replied. Do that. And Owen? Yeah. I'm really glad you walked into the wrong room. I smiled. Yeah, I said. Me too. We went separate ways after that. Different lines. Different gates. Different flights. But it didn't feel like an ending. Not even close. Later, sitting by the window on the plane, I pulled out my phone. One message. From Ethan. Ethan. Already weird not seeing you. I stared at it for a second, then smiled. Me. Yeah. But it doesn't feel like it's over. The typing bubble appeared almost immediately. Ethan. It's not. And somewhere between takeoff and landing, I realized something simple. I didn't just accidentally walk into the wrong hotel room. I walked into something I wasn't expecting and chose to stay. And this time, I wasn't walking away from it. Long distance sounded manageable in theory. In reality, it was strange. Not bad, just different. The first few days after the flight felt almost too easy. We texted constantly, not in an obsessive way, just naturally. Updates, random thoughts, things that reminded us of each other. It didn't feel forced. If anything, it felt like we just continued the same conversation from the hotel, just through a screen. But then real life settled in. Work, responsibilities, people around us who had no idea any of this existed. And that's when I started noticing the difference. The first time it hit me was a random Tuesday evening. I was sitting on my couch, laptop open, half working, half distracted. My phone lit up. Ethan, you'd hate this meeting I'm in. I smiled immediately. Me. I already hate it just hearing about it. A few seconds later. Ethan, miss having you next to me instead. That one stayed on the screen longer. Not because it was unexpected, because it felt heavier now. Back at the hotel, that kind of thing had been easy. Natural. Said without thinking too much about what it meant. Now it carried distance with it. I typed back. Me. Yeah, it was better like that. There was a pause. Then, Ethan, we'll get back there. That became our thing. Not ignoring the distance, but not letting it define everything either. We called almost every night. Sometimes short, sometimes long enough that we lost track of time. At first, it felt effortless, like picking up right where we left off. But after about a week, something shifted. Not in a bad way, just real. You're quiet, Ethan said one night. I was lying in bed, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the ceiling. Just tired, I replied. That's not it. I exhaled slowly. I was just thinking. About. I hesitated. Then, about how different this feels from being there. There was a pause on his end. Yeah, he said. I've been thinking that too. Not defensive. Not avoiding it. Just honest. It was easy there. I continued. Everything was right in front of us. No gaps. No waiting. Yeah. And now it's like, I search for the words. We have to trust something we can't actually see. Another pause. Then, quieter. Do you think that changes it? I didn't answer right away, because I'd been asking myself that same question. I think it tests it, I said finally. He was quiet for a second. Then, okay. The next few days felt a little heavier. Not distant, just more aware. We still talked, still texted. But now there were moments where one of us was busy, where replies took longer, where conversations ended because they had to, not because we wanted them to. And those gaps, they mattered. More than I expected. One night, I didn't call. Not intentionally. I just got caught up with work, then dinner, then lost track of time. By the time I looked at my phone, it was late. There was a message. Ethan, you okay? Nothing dramatic. Just simple. But I felt it immediately. I called him. He picked up almost instantly. Hey, I said. Hey, he replied. There was something in his voice. Not upset. Just off. Sorry, I added. I got pulled into stuff and didn't realize how late it got. Yeah, he said. I figured. But it didn't sound like he fully did. We stayed on the phone, but the energy was different. Not bad. Just less easy. You were waiting? I asked after a minute. He exhaled quietly. Yeah. That landed. Not because he was blaming me. Because he wasn't. He was just being honest. I didn't think it'd matter that much, I admitted. I didn't either, he said. Another pause. Then, softer. But it did. That was the moment it became real. Not the hotel. Not the goodbye. This. The part where it wasn't effortless anymore. Where it required something. Attention. Effort. Choice. I don't want this to turn into something that fades just because we're not in the same place, he said. It won't, I replied. You sure? I sat up slightly, running a hand through my hair. No, I admitted. But I don't want that either. Silence. Then, okay, he said. After that, things shifted again. Not back to easy, but forward. More intentional. We started planning calls instead of assuming them. Sending voice messages when we were busy. Actually making space for each other instead of hoping it would just happen naturally. It wasn't as effortless as before, but it felt stronger. A week later, Ethan said something that stuck with me. I think I get it now, he said during one of our calls. Get what? Why this didn't feel like an accident, he replied. I leaned back slightly. Why? Because it wasn't supposed to be easy forever, he said. It was just supposed to start that way. I thought about that. About how everything had lined up too perfectly at the beginning. And how now it didn't. But we were still here. Still choosing it. Yeah, I said quietly. That makes sense. There were still moments. Small ones. Where I missed him more than I expected. Walking somewhere alone. Sitting in silence. Seeing something that would have been better if he was there. But now, instead of that feeling being heavy, it just made me reach for my phone. And he was there. One night, before hanging up, he said, You ever think about that room? I smiled slightly. Yeah. Me too. Pause. Then, crazy that it started like that. Yeah, I said. Wrong room. Right person, he replied. And for the first time since we left, the distance didn't feel like something that could break it. It just felt like something we had to get through.